sort of about me and my relationship with games. So I play games casually for fun, and I've been doing so since college. But recently, I also started teaching games in a lot of my classes at TCU. I'm an English professor at TCU, and I teach a class on writing games, gender and sexuality in the video game industry. And I've also started incorporating some game development stuff into some of my other classes, some of my women and gender studies classes in particular. So that's sort of my relationship with gaming, is that it's fun and I do it sort of casually, but I'm also increasingly incorporating it into my teaching and kind of into my role as an educator. So for our workshop today, we are going to be working with a pretty, I think, easy to use platform called Twine. And there's a link to Twine in the resources doc for today. And Twine is a tool that enables, it's HTML-based. It's an HTML-based platform that is sort of interoperable with CSS and with JavaScript. So if you're familiar with web development at all, Twine's a pretty easy tool to use because it's pretty similar to web development. But we are going to be using that to build interactive fiction. So we're not going to be making games with a lot of graphics. We're going to be making games that are really text-based. So I'm going to start the workshop by talking a little bit about what is interactive fiction and what is a text-based game. We're going to play and discuss together in groups 2 short games. The first is called Spent, and it's about economic inequality. And the second is called Queers in Love at the End of the World. So we'll be playing those together, and I think that'll give us kind of a good basis for the types of games we can create with Twine. Queers in Love at the End of the World is actually made with Twine, and by the end of this workshop, you should be able to make that game. So hopefully we play it, you love it, and you're pumped by the fact that you'll be able to make that by the end of the workshop. Then I'm going to give some sort of basic information and rundown of Twine. We'll have a series of exercises that we do together where we kind of check back in to make sure we're all on the same page. We'll talk a little bit about CSS and how to style your game if you're not familiar with that. And then we'll learn how to do kind of the more programming aspects of Twine that allow you to create more complicated mechanics. I'm hoping, depending on how long I end up talking for, because I always talk for longer than I planned on talking for, I'm hoping that the last hour or so of this, we can actually have a game jam where we get into groups and we work on making our own games together. And maybe if we have enough time, we can kind of showcase some of those games at the end of the workshop. Okay, so what is interactive fiction? Has anyone, and you can just kind of signal maybe in the chat, has anyone played like Zork or heard of Zork? This is kind of an old game. So interactive fiction originated in the 1970s, in kind of the late 70s, and the first interactive fiction game was something called Colossal Cave Adventure. And Zork was kind of a popular kind of knockoff of that in a way that came afterwards. And these are sort of the games where it prompts you for what action you want to do, and then you type like, go west, pick up the knife, examine the closet. So they're all text-based. And they're associated, I think, kind of with the 70s and 80s, but there's actually a really kind of robust interactive community around interactive fiction today. There are all sorts of conferences and different developer groups. I think it's becoming an increasingly kind of mode in pedagogy and in education and even in other industries like healthcare. We'll talk about that in a second. But I also wanted to touch on games beyond entertainment. I know a couple of people were talking about Breath of the Wild, which is really fun. I'm playing that right now too. So I think most of us are probably familiar with games primarily as a form of entertainment, or maybe even as like a form of art. But games are increasingly becoming an important aspect of other industries. So obviously there's kind of like the education aspect. They're taught in school, they're used for education. They're also used in military training increasingly. They're used in the healthcare industry, in politics and in advertising. I have a couple interesting examples here if people want to go maybe and take a look at them. The green screen is of a game called World Without Oil. And it was actually a game that was created to help people be more responsible with their fuel consumption. And it was a pretty huge success. A lot of research after the fact showed that people who played this game were actually a lot more responsible with their fuel consumption and with their attitude towards fuel consumption after they played the game as opposed to before they played the game. The weird kind of image with the 3 sort of like fish figures. I'm not sure if anyone's heard of this. I haven't played it. It's called Endeavor Rex, and it came out this year. It is the first prescription game. So this game is being prescribed to children with ADHD to play for 20 minutes a day. So this is being advertised as the first FDA-approved prescription-based video game. And I think we're probably going to see more of that in the future. And then I also have a little screenshot here of a military-based training game. You see it a lot with flight simulation and also with combat simulation as well. So these are just some of the ways that games can be used beyond or outside of the entertainment industry. Okay, so before we start playing and analyzing our games, obviously I'm in academia, I'm a professor, so I'm kind of interested not just in games themselves, but in the way that people study games. So I thought we could go over a couple of key terms that are used in kind of game design and also in game studies and might help us as we're building our games today, give us some vocabulary for how we're going to do that. So the first term I wanted to talk about is PC, or player character. You also have NPC, which is a non-player character. So when thinking about the player character and the type of character you want to create, you might think about, is this character going to be an actual fully fleshed out character with an identity, right? Like, so Mario is an example. We know what Mario looks like. We know that he's a plumber, right? We know he has a certain personality. Or is your player character going to be essentially like an empty vessel for the player, right? Is it just going to be the player themselves interjecting them into the story, right? So whoever the player is, that's who they're imagining their player character is. Narrative or story, and the difference between narrative / story and mechanics, is kind of a really important concept when we're talking about how to make a game or we're analyzing how a game works. So games obviously have stories. Even a simplistic game like Monopoly arguably has a story, or a board game like the Game of Life. It's a very simple story, but it's still a story, right? And there are still characters. But the thing that separates games from books or movies or television is that they also have something called mechanics. And mechanics are essentially the rules of the game. They're the actions that you can take in a game. And a lot of people describe games as being different from other types of text because they're interactive. The player or the person accessing the game can make choices based on rules in that game, and those choices make it interactive. So that leads us to the idea of procedural rhetoric, which is a kind of fancy term, but I think it's really useful in thinking about the way that games work. So we talk about rhetoric when we analyze other media, like when we analyze a novel or a television show. Does it have pathos, which is like an emotional appeal, right? If something makes us cry, we're saying, okay, it's making an argument and it's doing so by making me cry. It's emotional, it's making me feel something. Or maybe it has a logical appeal, lots of facts and figures to help persuade. Games also have this kind of rhetoric or this persuasion that's based on their mechanics. So Ian Bogost is a kind of game studies person, a game studies scholar, and he describes procedural rhetoric as the art of persuasion through rule-based representations and interactions rather than the spoken word, writing, images, or moving pictures. So if we think about Monopoly, I read this really interesting analysis of Monopoly that was essentially saying that in a way, Monopoly argues for certain tenets of capitalism. It argues that everybody starts off with the same amount of money and the same skills and the same ability to buy property. It's an even playing field, right? Everybody who starts to play Monopoly starts out with the same stuff. They've got an even playing field. So those rules of the game, the fact that everybody gets the same amount of money, the fact that it's random whether or not you go to jail, all of these different rules actually potentially kind of make an argument about success, about the American dream, about money, right, and how we interact with money. So when we're analyzing or building our games today, I think it's worthwhile to think not only about the story that you're trying to tell with your game, like the narrative, the characters and the plot, but also to think a little bit about what the mechanics or the rules and the choices are arguing for or against. Okay, so in a few seconds, I think we're all going to get into little breakout groups, and I'd like us to take about 6 minutes to play this game called Spent. while you're playing the game, it should only take 5 or 6 minutes to play. While you're playing the game, there are 3 questions that I'd like you and your group to try and answer and to type the answers into chat. So what are the game's rules or mechanics? What emotions does the game make you feel? And what do you think the argument of the game is? What's it trying to persuade you of? So we're gonna go ahead and get into groups and give about 6 minutes for that. And then don't forget to type your answers into chat if you can. And it would probably work best if you're comfortable with leaving your camera on, definitely leave your camera on for your groups. Okay.
Okay, I'm just going to get some breakout rooms set up for this, and then we can go off into those groups. Give me 1 second. Nope, that didn't work the way I wanted to. 1 more second. Sorry for that.
And if you fail the first time you play the game, because it is possible to win and lose, you might restart it and try to win the game.
I am sorry about this, everyone. This is my first time working with breakout rooms, and I have to wait for the old ones to, there we go. Okay, here we go. So I'll be back here in about 6 minutes.
Did people get their invitation for their group okay?
Yeah, people are
Awesome.
People are joining their rooms now.
Cool. Thanks, Jen. Jen, do you know if I can see the chat still while I'm screen sharing?
I'm not sure.
Let's see.
There's not many people who can see your screen share at the moment, though. So if you want to just
Turn it off.
stop it, and yeah, if you want to stop it, that won't hurt anything.
Oh, thanks, Georgette.
Okay, so about 2 or 3 more minutes.
Mhm.
Cool.
And you can, I don't think I can do it, but I think from your end, you can type everybody who's in groups like a little message, and I don't know if it'd be worthwhile giving them like a 1-minute heads up.
I mean, I think that they should get a 1-minute timer when I close the room, so if they need a little bit of extra time, but
Cool.
yeah, I'll go ahead and give them a 2-minute warning.
Hey, whenever you're ready, Jen.
Okay, let's go ahead and start that timer. So, yeah, I closed the breakout rooms and there's now 50 seconds left before everybody gets kicked out of their room.
And if you haven't had a chance to type your kind of your feelings about the game or your response into chat, now would be a good time to do so. What emotions did it make you feel? What mechanics did the game employ? Do you think there's an argument that the game's trying to make or convince you of? Hmm. Okay. Are the rooms all, is everybody out of their rooms now?
Nope, we still, looks like people are going to go down to the very last second.
That's good. That means that someone is enjoying the game or trying to
Yeah.
be. Okay. Cool. Great. Yeah. And I was just saying, if you haven't had a chance yet to type into the chat what you think the game's argument is or what the mechanics are, the emotions that it made you feel, now would be a great time to add to the conversation. And if it's okay with everyone, I think I might just kind of pick on a few people to sort of share their impressions of the game as things are coming into chat. So Susie, would you mind sharing a little bit about, you said the game made you feel stressed, which I think is really accurate in a lot of people's feelings. How do you think it achieved that feeling of stress?
It keeps showing me the results of everything I choose. And every time I just lose money. Right now I'm on day 18 and I only have $17. And my kid is very sad.
Yeah, great. So sad is another emotion. And I think just, you're right, like being able to see the money dwindle at all times, right? There's that counter of the amount of money you have left on the side. Being able to constantly see that and be aware of that dwindle is very stressful. Kayla, would you mind talking a little bit? I hope I said your name right. Would you mind talking a little bit about the mechanics?
Yeah, so it's mostly just clicking and reading. I mean, there is a money aspect, but even so, you're still just clicking to like choose whether or not you want to spend that money.
Mhm.
And I think that's really simple. It reminds me a bit of a visual novel where you're mostly just reading and clicking things, but I think that those games still get the point across really well because of those decisions. It puts you in the role of whoever you're playing as really well. And, its point was to, um, prove it at the beginning of the game. Like you think you could deal with all these problems at once, prove it. So I think it was great for its purpose.
I like what you pointed out there about choice, right? So the mechanics are, in the sense, you know, kind of clicking on things, but the main mechanic here is being able to make choices, and choices about how you spend your money. And I think this game does a really good job of achieving something that's in game design referred to sometimes as a meaningful choice, or a choice that has an emotional weight. So we're going to be creating games with choices today. And when you create those choices, there's sort of two things that you want to keep in mind. Is it a meaningful choice? So if I have a student who's trying to make a game, and the game is they get up and in the morning they get to decide whether they have a banana or an apple, depending on how the story goes, that's not necessarily a meaningful choice, right? It doesn't necessarily have an emotional weight to it. Whereas with this, the decision to be able to put food on the table or pay for your child's field trip, that feels like a very weighty, significant, meaningful choice. And the other thing you want to think about is the outcomes of your choices. If regardless of the choice you make, the outcome is the same, your player is going to start to feel like the choices don't matter. So on the one hand, you want the choices to be emotionally meaningful, but you also want them to have real outcomes, or real differences in the story, or real differences in the mechanics that are a result of those choices. Okay, let's go ahead and play one more game. So we won't be able to make something like Spent by the end of the day today, unfortunately. We will be able to make the text-only version of Spent, but we won't be able to duplicate Spent. We will, however, be able to make a version of Queers in Love at the End of the World. So that game is also listed on the resources page, and it's also listed on the slides. This is a much shorter game. So let's just go ahead and break into our groups again. If you want to just sort of play it quickly and then maybe discuss amongst yourself how the game made you feel, what the mechanics were, how it's working, how it was different than Spent. This is a good model of a game that we'll be able to make by the end of the workshop. So let's go ahead and break into our groups for about 3-4 minutes, and then we'll come back and start working with Twine.
Okay, just give everybody a 2-minute warning.
Awesome. I'm going.
Yeah, so Georgette is asking if you can reshare the slides because something happened to them.
Yeah, I'm copying them into a new version now, and we'll reshare that.
Hmm.
Can you still see them, Jen? I can still see them okay, but.
I don't have them open. I've just been watching on the screen share.
Okay, as people are coming back, if you want to add into the chat how the game made you feel, if you think it has an argument, what some of the mechanics are. I've had some really interesting interpretations of this game before, so confused, yeah. Okay, so let's see. Ashley, would you mind talking a little bit? You said it was more of a story than a game. Would you mind sharing sort of what you meant by that?
Sure. So it was like a sped up choose your own adventure game. And so every choice you made led to a different outcome or a different thing. And you tried to, like I played it like 4 times, but every choice you made, you tried to make sure that you chose a choice that you could have more storyline with.
Yeah, so I mean, the core mechanic in a way is the timer, right? And that feeling of, I don't know, did people feel stressed or did people just feel like hurried? I see confused a lot. Courtney, you said sped up chose your own adventure. Yeah, how did it make you feel?
It reminded me of one of those old movies where it was like, the world is about to end, let's go do all the things.
Yeah. Was
So
that a positive emotion for you or more of a negative emotion?
I love the game Last Night on Earth, so it's kind of a positive for me.
Okay, that intense rush is
Yeah.
okay. Did anyone have any interpretation of it? What does this game mean? I mean, it's a different game than Spent, right? Spent was obviously put out for kind of political reasons. It has a very clear argument that it's trying to make about economy, about poverty. Does this game have an argument? What do people think? Mark, do you think this game has an argument?
Honestly, I don't know. I guess I kept replaying, trying to do a lot of different options just to see what the results would be and see if I could read it before the timer ran out.
Okay, I think that's the way that most people kind of responded to it emotionally. Veronica, I like what you noted. Could you share your thoughts about the game a little bit?
Well, hello, yeah. I feel like the mechanics and the timer also make you feel the things that the protagonists were feeling about this girl. The girl were fading, and the time was fading too, so your time was connected with this situation.
Yeah, I really like that, this idea of life is short and what do we care about, right? To empathize with the protagonist, right? If you only have 10 seconds left on Earth, it's kind of the great equalizer, right? Like love is the same, and who you love and who you care about, that's what you're thinking about in those final moments. I also had a student interpret this game once as sort of, in a way, for a lot of queer people who are dealing with different forms of discrimination and oppression, you know, they suggested that every day might feel like the end of the world, right? That every day they might be put in this situation where the world feels like it's ending. and that this is to kind of create empathy, you know, for that feeling of the world ending. And I think that's a really beautiful interpretation as well. Okay, so hopefully these provided some food for thought for different types of games you can create with primarily text. And we're gonna learn, this last game was built in Twine, and we're gonna learn essentially how to do this. So the core mechanic is the timer and the ability to make choices. So let me go ahead, and at this point, if you haven't already opened the slides and the links, you're probably definitely gonna wanna do so. You can copy and paste code from the slides directly into Twine. So it might be useful to go ahead and make sure you all have those open now. Okay. So, and I copied and pasted another version. Someone said there was something up with the slides. I copied and pasted another version into the Drive folder. So hopefully that should be working for people. Okay. So Twine is an open source, free to use HTML-based web platform for building interactive fiction. We're going to be working exclusively with the web platform today, but you can download a version of it that you use on your desktop. So you can use the web browser version, or you can also download it and use the desktop version. So when you go to Twine, your page is going to look a little different than my page, because you probably, maybe some of you have, but probably have not created games in Twine before. So you're gonna go ahead and click on that Use It Online link at the side of the screen. Use It Online, right in the sticky note. Hopefully everybody can see that. Go ahead and click it, Use It Online. And then you should be staring at mostly an empty box. What you're going to want to do is click the plus story green button. And this is going to take you to sort of the developer design mode. You can name it anything you want. And this is what you should be looking at once you open up Twine. I'll give everybody a second to catch up. So Twine is organized, the primary unit in Twine is called a passage. And the way to think of passages is kind of a different page in your game. So each time you click a choice, it'll take you to a different page. So we start with one default passage in Twine. So if you go ahead and you double click on that passage, it'll open up that little sticky note, and you'll be looking at pretty much an empty white page. You can title your passage. I usually like to call my first one beginning or start, just because it's sort of easy to remember. And then you can type text into the main body. Notice when you delete anything that's in there, it'll come up with this sort of faded in the background tutorial in a sense. So this information, it looks kind of scary when you're first there, but this isn't actually doing anything. It can be kind of helpful because it has reminders about different code for Twine. It kind of has a little tutorial in it. So I'm just gonna start typing my story. I don't know if anyone's familiar with the story, The Yellow Wallpaper, but I was teaching it in class last week, so we're gonna make a game version of The Yellow Wallpaper. All right, you wake up in the morning. Should you get out of bed or go back to sleep? Okay, and you can type whatever you want as you're following along. So if I go ahead and click away from the passage, you'll see two buttons at the bottom of the screen that are kind of important. The first is the play button, and the other is the test button. The test button has the little symbol of like a ladybug next to it, because essentially this is the debugging mode. We don't really need that yet because we haven't done anything too complicated, but if you go ahead and hit play, it's going to show you what that passage will look like in a browser. So this is the game that I've created so far. I've created basically an HTML page that says you wake up in the morning, should you get out of bed or go back to sleep? But at the moment, there's nothing interactive about this. There aren't any mechanics, there aren't any choices, it's just a static HTML page. So if I go back to my sort of developer screen and I double click on my passage, I'm gonna start to add some choices. I'm going to put double square brackets around any text that I want to be a link or to be a choice. So I'm gonna put double square brackets around get out of bed and around go back to sleep. Okay, so double square brackets on both sides of any text that you want to turn into a choice. So notice when you close that, it's automatically created new passages. I now have a passage called Get Out of Bed and a passage called Go Back to Sleep. And you can see in the organizational view here that the beginning links to or branches off to either of those choices. I can then fill these with text and additional choices. Okay, so now if I click play, you'll notice that the two choices I have are appearing as links. And when I click on those, it takes me to the additional passage that was automatically created. I can use the back button, which is a little hard to see, but there is an undo button to undo my choice if I want to play with and experiment with the other choices I've created. So this is the basic building block of Twine. It's very simple. It's just creating additional choices, and the way you do that is with square brackets. So it's pretty simple. A few other things that I want to mention before we do our first exercise is that because Twine is in the browser, it will not remember your game. So if you were to clear your browser history, if you were to try and open this game in another browser or on another machine, it would not remember it because it's storing it in your browser history. So this is a really serious conundrum. A lot of people have lost their games not realizing it would happen when they clear their browser history. So the way around that is to save your game as an HTML file, and then you can upload it through Twine. So this game that I just made, I'm gonna go ahead and click on the name of the game at the bottom next to the little home icon. And there is a publish to file button. When you click that publish to file button, it'll download the game as a .html file to your desktop. You can then upload that .html file into Twine the next time you want to work on it. This is really important, both for kind of version control, but also to make sure that you don't erase your game. So if we go back to the main screen for Twine, see underneath plus story, it says import from file. If you click that, you can choose a .html file to upload here, and it will take you to that design screen for the .html file. So in the Google Drive folder that I put together, there is a game, a little game that I created that we're gonna be working with. So it's in the .zip file. If you go ahead and download that .zip file and open it up, there's a sample story.html file. So if everybody could go ahead and download that and try to upload through the import from file, the sample story.html, we'll be working with that story a little bit together to kind of add to it and modify it and learn how to do some more complicated things with Twine. But for the moment, go ahead and get that uploaded if you can. And we will do our first kind of exercise, building some passages. Okay. And this is just a review in case you forget. The way to create a passage is double square brackets around whatever text you want to be turned into a passage. And it's worth noting to you that passage names are case sensitive. So if you make a passage called the beginning with a lowercase b, and then you try to link to it with the beginning and uppercase b, it's gonna think those are two very different passages. So make sure that you're keeping things case sensitive. Okay. So we're gonna go ahead and get into groups for 5 minutes. And if you're struggling or if something doesn't make sense, reach out, to your group mates and try and get through it together. This is kind of a little bit easier than kind of putting lots of questions into chat. So try and get through it together. We'll give you about 5 minutes. And basically you're gonna be adding 2 additional passages to that .html file. Okay.
Okay, I'm going to send everyone back to your rooms now.
It sounds so sinister.
It does, doesn't it?
Really.
Okay. Can you still hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Thanks.
My good headphones were complaining about low battery.
My headphone jack in my computer hasn't worked for the last 6 months.
That's poor timing.
Indeed.
Okay. Give them a 2-minute warning now.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Okay, whenever you're ready.
Yeah, I hit the button, so
Cool.
they should be back shortly.
Awesome. Okay. So as people are sort of trickling back, one thing about this layout that is kind of handy is that you can actually drag and drop the passages around to make the layout a little bit more sensible for however you're designing the story. So you can kind of move the pieces around. It doesn't have any effect on the actual story itself or the way it plays out, but it can make it a little bit easier to sort of view and plan things out as you're building your story. Okay, is everybody back?
It will be shortly. Okay, now it looks like we have everybody.
Awesome. Okay, so just to kind of go through quickly, I'm sure that everybody got it after the first try. It's pretty easy to use. But so if we wanted to add an additional passage onto freeze, we could just put it in double brackets here, and Twine will automatically create it. And then if we wanted to link from 2 different places, it's pretty simple. So we want to create a passage called afterwards. We'll do that here. It creates afterwards, but we want to link to it from 2 different places so that we can get that ending even if we chose multiple paths through the story. So notice it actually will autofill for me here, which is really nice. Because it's case sensitive, because it's so easy to forget what you named a passage, the autofill option is pretty handy. So now, both of those link to our afterwards. We can kind of move them around a little bit to see that. So now we have multiple paths through the story, but regardless of what choices you make, you end up with the same ending. You end up in the same place. That could be a good thing. It could also be a bad thing because you want the player to feel like the choices had meaning, and the choices resulted in a different ending. So you could use that afterwards page perhaps as a place to link back to the beginning of the story to suggest that they try playing again, or to provide some information about who you are as a game developer and maybe a link to a professional page or somewhere for them to go next. Okay, so this is the bread and butter. You can create a game just using passages. And I've seen some really great games that are very story-driven, very character-driven, that only incorporate passages. That's the only mechanic, is the ability to choose different links. But there are some interesting, more complicated things that you can do as well. And the first kind of principle I want to talk about is the way that code goes into Twine. One thing that I should point out is that Twine is really confusing in that even though it's HTML based, there are actually kind of different sub-languages within Twine. So if you go down and you click that little button that we clicked last time to be able to publish our story, you'll see a button that says change story format. And this is very confusing. You can create Twine games in all of these different sort of sub-languages or flavors of Twine. The two main ones are Harlow and SugarCube. I think those are most kind of popularly used. There are some differences. I don't know that there's a clear advantage between one or the other. We're working with Harlow today, but I want to point this out because the programming that goes into creating even the styling, even the color choices and using a background image, the way you do that in Twine varies depending on which story format you're using. So if you're creating a game and you really want to have a color gradient in the background and you Google, how do I do a color gradient in Twine? And it's not working for you, it might be not working because you're using Harlow, and that's the answer if you were using the SugarCube flavor. So when you're Googling or looking on the wiki or looking on Stack Overflow for answers on how to do what you want to do, make sure that they're not just for Twine, make sure they're for the flavor of Twine that they're using, because the languages within that actually vary quite a bit. And everything that I'm going over today is specifically for the most recent version of Harlow, the Harlow flavor. Okay, so within the Harlow flavor, the way that sort of code happens, the way that you create more interesting mechanics is through macros and typically hooks. So in Twine, a macro is essentially just the term for code. They refer to them as macros. So it kind of be like functions in another language. These are the pieces of code that perform an operation on a variable or on a piece of text. So if you were to copy and paste this code right here into one of your Twine passages, what it would essentially do is it would display the word heart. And when you click on the link heart, it would change to heartbroken. So the code itself is the macro link reveal, and it's essentially a function, and it's applying to the word broken. Broken is a hook. So remember, we use the double brackets to indicate that something was a link, a new passage. Single brackets are used to create a hook, and a hook is essentially text that you're going to be applying some functionality to. In this case, we're making this text appear when we click on a link, but it's not taking us to a new passage. It's just changing the text when we click on it. So when you see this kind of formatting, macros or the code, the thing that you're trying to do, is typically represented in parentheses, and it's followed by text in single square brackets. That's the hook, or what you're trying to apply the functionality to. Hopefully that makes sense. And those are sort of the two components of sort of an expression of what you're trying to do in Twine. And we'll see some more examples of that as we go along. So let's talk a little bit about styling your game. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with CSS, but I kind of cascading style sheets. I wanted to kind of run over it really quickly because Twine does use CSS because it's HTML based. So CSS is the language that's used to basically format and provide styling to web pages, to HTML pages. And it's typically broken down into a couple of components. The first component is the selector. It's the thing you're trying to style. So it might be your paragraph, it might be a particular sentence, it might be the whole page, but it's an indication of what you want to apply styling to. Then you have a curly bracket and you have a declaration. So in this case, we want to make the font color blue. So we have the property, color, and then the value blue. We could change this to, we want the color to be pink, we want the color to be a particular numerical value, we want it to be a gradient, what have you. And then with each different property that we want to change, we use a semicolon. So color for the font is going to be blue. Next part of the expression, I want the font size to be 12 pixels. So if you're not familiar with CSS, it just takes a little bit of getting used to, but there are so many resources on the web for it. It's not really even necessarily something you need to learn. You can just Google, you know, how do I make gradient using CSS? How do I change font size using CSS? And you can pretty much copy and paste whatever expression Google gives back to you into Twine, and I'll show you where to do that. So there are actually a couple of different ways to change your styling in a Twine game. Most of them are CSS based. The first is if you want to apply styling to the entire game. Maybe you want a background image to be on each page of your game. Maybe you want to change the overall font or the font styling. Sometimes though, you might want to apply styling directly to a specific section of text. Maybe you just want a couple words in the paragraph to be green. Maybe you just want a single paragraph to be larger than another paragraph. So let's look at kind of those two different ways of doing things. So if you go back into your Twine game and you click the name at the bottom like we've been doing before, in addition to changing your story format, there's also Edit Story Style Sheet. And if you go ahead and click on that, that is essentially the CSS, the cascading style sheet that's being applied to all of your Twine pages. So I already have a little bit of CSS in here so that you can kind of cut and paste from it or play with it a little bit. But this is just saying essentially that the body, the text in my entire Twine story, I want the font size to be large. So this is applying to everything. If I were to change that to font size to be small, all of the pages of my game would then have small font size. So what if I want to make a more granular change? If I want to make a more granular change, I can use that idea of a macro and a hook. So let's see. Let's make the throne room in that opening passage. Let's change the color of that text. We're going to use a CSS macro, and we're going to make the color pink. So what this is essentially saying, what I just typed into the parens is saying, okay, we're going to be using CSS code, CSS, and in the quotes, it's the CSS expression. Color is going to be pink. And I could add more onto this. I could make, you know, the background color different. I could make the font different. I could do whatever I wanted in the rest of this expression. And then by putting the single brackets around the throne room is dark right after that code, that's the hook. That's what's getting applied to. That's what's going to be changed. That's where we're going to see that pink color. So that's how you're going to go and make changes to kind of more granular parts of your game, a single paragraph, a single word, a single sentence, etc. Okay, let's go ahead and break into groups for another 5 minutes. I have a couple of CSS-based activities. So if you can, try and make the background for the entire game gray, and try to make the font in just the freeze passage red. And if you have time, you can fool around with other styling options as well. So maybe 4 or 5 minutes from that. And then we'll come back and we'll start to get into the code itself a little bit more if you want to have complicated game mechanics. Jen, I don't know if you want to give a 2-minute warning or so. Great. Jen, would you let me know when everyone's back? I feel awkward because I don't know. Oh, I don't think I can hear you.
Sorry. About 25 seconds now until everyone's back.
Yeah, I feel like I might just like maintain the silence like 3 minutes after everyone comes back, not realizing it. Okay. All right, so let's just kind of start going over really quickly the way to do both of those things. So if we go back into our game.
Probably just want to wait a little bit. We're still missing some people. Okay.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So to make the change to the entire game, we can go into Edit Story Style Sheet. And I'm just going to change this. Well, I'm going to add to it. I'm going to say background gray. And that should apply that background color to my entire game. And if I want the text in here to be red, I can go ahead and put that CSS macro in here.
I don't think you're sharing your screen.
Oh no! Totally right, totally right. Okay, can everybody see it now?
Yes.
I'm sorry, my
That's
bad.
better.
Okay. So yeah, if you go ahead and put the CSS macro right in front of the text on the freeze passage, and then you go ahead and put the freeze passage in single brackets, it'll go ahead and turn just the font on that one page red. And you can, of course, test all of this using debugging mode, or you could also just play the game. So now we have our nice gray background on all of the pages of our game. Okay. Did anyone, I want to pause here, did anyone have any questions that they wanted to ask either about creating passages or about doing CSS styling?
Looks like we've got a couple people in the chat that were asking if you could re-go over how you did the background again.
Oh yeah, for sure. I'm sorry. That was totally my bad. I did it invisibly, so it's a good question to have. So we're going to go back into Edit Story Style Sheet. It's in that kind of menu where we've got the saving option and also the change story format. So Edit Story Style Sheet. And I just added it to my CSS here. So I added within the curly brackets after that semicolon for the font size, I'm going to do background colon gray semicolon. And if you were to Google CSS background color, this would pretty much come up and you could copy and paste it into your Twine style sheet. Okay.
I have a question if that's okay to ask.
Yeah, for sure.
Just to make sure, in the style sheet, we don't need to put the CSS in quotation marks. That's only when we're working in passages.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. So that like the one way to think of it is like the literal CSS can go into the style sheet, but then the kind of twiney version of the CSS goes in the individual pages. And actually, there's a cheat for it. You don't actually have to put CSS colon. If you wanted to do some like complicated CSS stuff, you would, but Twine has a little hack. You can make color the macro, the code. And if you just do color colon red, it'll treat it the exact same way as if you do CSS colon quote marks color red. So this is kind of like the little cheat for that. A good question. Any other questions?
Angela, and also myself as well, wanted to know if there was a way to style the actual link color. Because I thought if I just targeted the anchor tag, it would work.
No.
And it didn't.
So yes, you can. I think there is a specific macro for it in Harlow. In SugarCube, I believe you can treat it just by targeting the A. Like SugarCube is like, if you are more familiar with HTML, I think SugarCube might be the way to go, because I think even in SugarCube, if you want to insert an image, you can use an HTML image tag directly in Twine. So I don't remember the specific macro for it in Harlow, but if you wanted to get into SugarCube, you could probably deal with it just more of the way you would deal with it in straight up HTML.
Gotcha. It looks like Sean posted TW-link as the possible, what would possibly work.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you, Sean. All right. Any other questions, or should we get on to the good stuff? All right. Let's talk a little bit about variables. Okay. So far we've learned how to create a passage, and we've learned how to do some styling. You can also add sound to your Twine games as well. It's kind of a little bit more complicated, but it is possible to add video and sound and other multimedia as well. But we haven't really talked about how to do kind of more complicated mechanics like the timer, or maybe you want to do an inventory system, or maybe you want to have a whole host of endings that depend on complicated choices that the player is making. So kind of the building block of doing this is creating a variable in Twine. So I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with the concept of variables from other programming languages. The way that I typically describe it to my student is a variable is kind of like a bucket that you can fill with different things. So you can change the value of a variable. So in Twine, you can create a variable using the macro set. And all variables in Twine, just like in some other programming languages, are referred to with a $sign before the name of the variable. So if you're dealing with a variable, make sure you include $sign and then the name of the variable. So let's just pretend that this first little gray box is the first passage of my game, the beginning. I'm going to create a variable called good choices. So this bucket called good choices, the player's never going to see it, but the value of the bucket is going to change over the course of the game depending on what choices the player makes. So I'm going to set good choices, I'm going to create it and set it to 0. So at the moment, the bucket that is good choices, it has 0 in it. It has nothing. It's equal to 0. Let's say that the player decides, this is a horror game, they decide to enter the basement alone with no flashlight and the powers went out. I'm going to change the good choices variable to -1. So by selecting this passage, it's going to lower the value of that variable to -1. So now good choices is equal to the number -1. And that happened from then clicking on that passage. So they're not going to see this. They're not going to know that this variable exists. They're not going to know that its value has changed by clicking on this page. The fact that it's a macro, that it's in parens, means that you as the developer can see it and it's making things happen, but the player won't be able to see it. So then let's say on the very last page of our game, on our very last passage, we want to have different text, different outcome, different ending based on the value of good choices. So if throughout the game the player made a lot of good choices, we might want to tell them good job, congratulations. If they made a lot of bad choices, we might want to have a different ending. So you can have if statements and conditionals in Twine. So this macro if says if good choices, if that variable is equal to the number 1, if 1 is in the bucket, then I want you to print the hook good job. On the other hand, if good choices is less than 0, so if it's -1, I want you to print the hook, this doesn't look good. So rather than have multiple passages that are endings, you could have one passage at the end that has different text endings or different visuals or different what have you, different music, based on the choices that were made that were sort of collected by this variable throughout the game. And you can have multiple variables working in concert. We could have a variable for fear and a variable for good choices and a variable for stress or anxiety, all kind of working together. And we could create different outcomes and different text endings at the very end of the game based on what the values of those variables are by the time we get there. Does anyone have any questions about variables or about macros? Okay, so I had a little exercise around this, but I think rather than do that, I'm just really quickly going to walk through with you all. I already put a variable in the game, so I thought we could just kind of take a look at that. So if you open the beginning, this right here is the timer, the set counter to 10, and then the macro dealing with how many seconds you have left. At the very bottom of that, though, I've created another variable called confidence. And confidence is set to 0 at the very beginning. As you move through the game, I add to confidence depending on the choices that are made. So if the player clicks lock the door and moves into this passage, confidence is now going to be equal to the number 1. It's really weird phrasing, and I mess up on this all the time, but you don't put in Twine or in Harlow, confidence is equal to +1 or confidence +1. It's the very awkward phrasing of confidence to it +1. So if you're noticing that there's something wrong with your variable, it could be that you have forgotten that kind of awkward phrasing of essentially to itself +1. I want to show really quickly in debugging mode how this can be helpful when you're dealing with variables. So you'll notice in the bottom corner, I have like a variable counter here essentially. It lets me know, okay, what variables have been instantiated, what variables have been created. And then as I move through the game, it'll let me know whether or not those variables change. So here I selected the route where my confidence didn't go up at all. So I know that it's still equal to 0. But if I'm clicking on the options where my confidence should go up, like lock the door, notice that in that counter, it's told me that, okay, your confidence is now set to 1. So this debugging mode is a really good way if you're doing different variables to keep track of player choices throughout your game. This is kind of the place to make sure that those are working the way that you think they are and that choices are accruing what you want them to be accruing throughout the game. Okay, if there aren't any questions about variables, there are just kind of a few other things I wanted to get into, and then I thought maybe we could move on to do a very short 20 or so minute game jam where we could just sort of brainstorm different ideas for games and maybe start making games. I've seen people make pretty successful Twine games in 10 to 15 minutes before, so it is possible. So if you go to the link there, I created a little poll on what our game jam theme would be. If you've ever done a game jam, usually they're themed around a specific word or a phrase. So if you want to go ahead and click on that and click for whichever topic for our game jam you want to vote for, we can announce that as it comes in. Let's see. Ooh, okay. Whoa, it was an even tie there for a second. All right, I'll give everybody a few more seconds to vote for what they want to make a game about. And these can be loosely interpreted. They don't have to be, you know, literal. Obviously, these are pretty open to interpretation. Oh man, The Year We Make Contact and Light and Shadow are tied for the moment. We've got to have a few more votes to break the tie. All right, I'm going to pause it here. Light and Shadow at 44%. We're going to say Light and Shadow is the topic of our game jam. So I'm going to break everybody, or we're going to break everybody into groups. And if you want to just use the next 20 minutes or so to start brainstorming a game and start making it in Twine together, we can come together if we have time and share them. Or I was thinking, if you are able to create something, even if it's not finished, even if it's not what you want it to be, If you could email us the .html file, if you could publish it to file when you're done and email it to us, we might be able to incorporate it into the next game workshop a little bit. And then we can kind of see what people were working on, what they're interested in making, kind of where their thoughts were. I also want to draw everyone's attention really quickly. In the Drive folder, there is a link to resources. So there's a game design canvas. I don't know if anyone's worked with Lean Canvas before. It's kind of like a workflow design tool to get you brainstorming for different projects. That might be helpful as you're thinking about your game creation. It's kind of different prompts and different components of your game you're going to want to think about as you get started. And I was also hoping that people could type into the Google Doc their team name, their tentative game title, and a very brief description of the game that they're trying to make together. If you get stuck as you're working, there are a bunch of Twine resources here. The number one is Twine Wiki for Harlow. It has everything. Make sure that you're working in Harlow. There's one for SugarCube as well, but this is sort of the definitive resource for any and all questions Twine related. Okay, so if we just want to break into groups for the next 15, 20 minutes or so, maybe 15 minutes, and then I'm happy to take questions either now or at the very end as well.
Okay, I'm going to send everyone out to breakout rooms again. Good luck.
Teams. And if anyone's hanging out in this group and doesn't want to join another group, we can totally make a game together. If people want. Jen, we should make a game together.
I mean, yeah, I guess we could do that. Do you want to make a game together?
We should make a game together.
All right.
Okay. Light and shadow.
Yeah, I don't know.
I feel either Star Wars or Lord of the Rings with that.
I have been doing a lot of Star Wars lately.
Me too. We watched 7, 8, and 9 last weekend and played like 24 hours of Star Wars Battlefront.
Nice. I'm coming up on the end of Star Wars Fallen Jedi. And I've been running a Star Wars RPG.
Cool. Very neat. Oh, Azari says her room is empty.
Oh, that's no good.
We move her into a more populated room.
Yes, I've been trying to keep people in rooms that have people.
Yeah.
But...
Cool. Jen, would you mind broadcasting to everybody like my email address or an email address where they can email their .html files when they're done?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. So does all of the Star Wars mean you're Star Warsed out, or does it mean you want more?
No, I do not get tired of Star Wars.
Okay. I have to ask, how did you feel about the last 3 movies?
I think that The Last Jedi might be the best Star Wars movie. And then Rise of Skywalker was deeply disappointing.
Yeah, it was deeply disappointing. I don't think it was the worst Star Wars movie ever made, but I have a very love-hate relationship with the prequels. So
Yeah, it's so my wife has actually not seen the prequels, or
okay.
hadn't. So like we watched through those somewhat recently.
Azari, do you still need another room? I'm so sorry.
Sorry, Azaria. I thought I sent you to a room.
You can totally hang with us though. That's cool too.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry that that didn't work out. That's on me. I mean, I think it shows you in a breakout room, but clearly you're still here, so I don't know what to do.
You can try moving because it should give you the option to like move to.
Yeah.
Try moving Azari to another room and let's see if Azari gets an invite.
Okay. Try this room. Hopefully you have an invite now. There we go.
Cool. Maybe? Maybe not.
I went, and as soon as it loaded and I heard voices, it was like, oh, switching back to main. I was like, what? So
That's weird.
That's weird.
It must be a Zoom bug. Like in the list of rooms, it shows you as being assigned to the room but not joined. I don't know. That's what it looked like before too.
Oh. I think Azari has successfully joined a room.
Yeah, no, she's in room 2. But Sarah's not. Sarah, did you get kicked out of your room?
It was just me and one other person, and they weren't very responsive, in our breakout room experiences earlier in the meetup, so I just figured I would make my game on my own and kick it back out here.
Okay, yeah, I mean, that's...
No, that's totally fine. If you would like us to try and find you a more active room and send you to the active room, that's cool too. Because
okay.
Do we know who zombie asteroids are? Because they look like they're kicking it.
I'm not sure, but I can ask.
Okay. I feel like that would be a good group to be sent to, potentially. They seem active.
Zombie asteroids, you say?
Zombie asteroids. I'm sorry about that, Sarah. The breakout groups are always such a mixed bag.
Yeah, I'm sorry too that I was trying to keep people together so that you could like get to know each other a little bit, and I was taking it as a positive sign when people joined a room. So
we could put Sarah in the group that Azari went to because then we at least know that Azari's in it to win it.
I think that's the group that Sarah was just in. So I kind of feel bad for Azaria too.
Oh no.
Like
maybe everyone should just be in zombie asteroids.
well, it has been almost 12 minutes now. Oh no, it's been 9 minutes now.
Well, we can always just encourage people to exchange contact info if they're working with a group that they really like and it is active, and otherwise we can open it up for questions in a few minutes.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good solution. Hi, Casey. I was just noticing that you were the last person in your room. If you want to join another one, we can try to do that, or you're welcome to just hang out in the main chat with us. Okay, great.
Did I miss the join button for that other group, or I never saw it pop up?
Where'd you go?
Sorry, nobody responded about who was making the asteroids game, so I don't know where to send you. I can just pick one though if you want to do that.
Trial by fire.
Gambling. I like it.
Okay. I'm going to do is send you to Megan's room.
Sarah, you'll have to report back if they are in fact the asteroid group.
Okay, here you go.
It's still not sending me, or I don't know. Am I supposed to do something?
I'm not sure.
Does
yeah,
it, Sarah?
Same as before, it shows you in the room but not joined. I don't have a lot of options here, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Yeah, on my end, I'm not seeing the thing where it's asking me to join a breakout room.
The only thing I've found that ever kind of works for that is moving people in and out. Like sometimes, like if you move Sarah like back into a different group and then back into that group, sometimes it seems like it resends the invitation. But
yeah, I mean, I can do that if you want. We still have a few minutes left on.
Oh.
Well, I'll just tell you about what my idea was going to be.
Yes.
Maybe the other team's doing this. I was thinking, okay, I'll make it like a maze type of game where you have to find the only light switch in the house that works. And that you could get really lost because you get sidetracked by other things that you find in the dark. And then like never find your way to the light switch and therefore like never complete the game. But I don't know. I feel like this probably would take a lot longer than the 20 minutes we had anyway.
Like you could probably do. What would be cool is if like when you flicked the light switch, it like illuminated other text options or like other links. Like you would have to flip it in order to be able to see like the other rooms you could go into or the other things you could pick up.
Yeah, like a maze of not just finding one light switch, but like turning light switches on to get you to the next maze. Oh, that's cool.
And maybe you'd have to maybe there could be a puzzle where you have to like turn the light switches on in a certain order in order. Yeah.
Yeah,
Puzzles
I mean,
are great. Yeah.
Yeah. Or like I hate to suggest like this kind of back and forth fetching, but you could easily imagine like having to find fuses to like go and like repair the fuse box so that you can turn more lights on at the same time.
I love that. Like you have to switch the light to go down to the basement to get the light bulbs to screw into the light in the kitchen.
There has to be a basement aspect when you're talking about like fuses. Absolutely.
Definitely. What do you think would the primary, because I would think automatically like fear, right? Like if you're in the dark and you're trying to put light on, but it doesn't sound like a very scary game. It sounds kind of more, I don't know, are you thinking like exciting or quirky?
Just puzzling all together, really. I guess I'm not as focused on the story part. I guess I'm not a good storyteller.
No. I mean, like, well, when you describe, having to move through a dark house, especially one that you don't know very well, like, I mean, like, you can imagine mechanics happening for when the lights are out in a room you're in. And, I can imagine that being scary or requiring some, boldness or that kind of a thing.
Yeah, so I did actually start making it on my own when we were in our room, and the very first passage I say, like, you open your eyes and it looks the same as when they were closed. Where's the light? You think to yourself, and you go to find the light switch, like that's your brackets. And when you go to find the light switch, you basically like flip it on and it doesn't work, and then your options are give up or go find another light switch. So you could not be bold or be too scared and just give up.
Yeah.
Early ending. I like that. It's really good. You should put some of the lights on timers too. That'd be cool. Should we pull people back in case they have questions?
Yeah, we can do that. So here we go. Everybody gets the 1 minute countdown.
Sarah, you should send us the HTML file for the 2 passages you have. Maybe we can like build off of them or do something with them next time. It sounds really cool. It's a good game idea. Ooh, pretty screensaver.
Where was that email at again? I saw Jen pop it somewhere, but then I don't know where it is now.
Yeah, I'll put our emails in chat again.
I can put it in the Google Doc too. I can put mine anyway. I'm not sure that I know. So we've already heard about one really awesome game involving puzzle solving with flicking light switches on and off in order to illuminate the passages, which sounds really awesome. Does anyone else want to share what their group talked about or what kind of game you were thinking about making?
Yeah. Oh.
Sorry. Ours was kind of traditional in a sense that we chose to do, or we tried to do a like white knight versus like a black knight kind of battle.
Okay.
We didn't get super far, but that was sort of our idea.
I like that. I love how different, I went either Lord of the Rings or Star Wars from the theme myself, but like how different that is from the light switch puzzle, right? Like even though it's the same theme, totally different. Someone else was gonna share.
Yeah, that was me. My name's Lixed, and I was teamed with Kat. We called ourselves the Fusion Tigers.
Ooh,
I love it.
Our idea was we are in the tunnel, and to your left is light, and to your right is shadows. And of course, the more you walk towards the light, you end up dying. But if you walk towards the shadows, you're coming back to Earth, being alive.
wow. That's really clever and very, very deep. Like I feel kind of a little bit on my spine from that one. I like that a lot. Very cool. So I know that people probably didn't get very far, right? And that's totally fine. But if anyone has even like one HTML passage in Twine, please email it to us, because then we can maybe play with it or build off of it or do something with it in the next workshop. So don't be afraid. If you've got even a little bit, maybe we can talk about it next time. Does anyone, before we wrap up for tonight, I also want to definitely utilize, I put some links to some of my favorite games too that are free to play in the Google Doc. So maybe take a look at those if you're sort of interested in this. Most of them are less than 15 minutes to play and they're all free. But if anyone has any questions, I'm more than happy to answer those either now or via email later. So any questions at all, I'm happy to answer or try to answer. Cool.
I also want to say, just if you do, if you have created anything or if you keep working on it, we would love to see it on social media. You know, like share it to us on Twitter, on Facebook, you know, wherever you spend your time being social on the internet. That would be great. We have, let me see, someone asking for the link to the Google Doc again. Gabi, can you have that handy? Can you share it?
Yeah.
Also, just a couple quick things. When the event's over, we'll go ahead and send out an email that has the Slack form as well as the volunteer and speaker form in it. And we are recording this, so once we wrap up tonight, we will ask to get it posted on the Women Who Code Global YouTube channel. And if you want to rewatch it or kind of catch up before the next event, it should be available by then for you to rewatch.
Maybe we could email it. I could probably email people the drive folder again too, just so people have copies of the material.
We'll definitely include this link in there.
Yes, absolutely. Sorry. Yes, we will also include the Google Drive link.
Veronica, that's a really good question. Unfortunately, there isn't. What I have done in the past that has worked kind of well as a teaching material is I'll have groups write their dialogue and their different passages out on Google Docs, and then one person will be responsible for copy and pasting those into Twine. It's not super sophisticated, but then everybody can kind of co-edit dialogue and co-edit description and text together, but they can't obviously co-edit the code. So that is a good question. I wish there was. I really wish there was. Cool. Awesome. Well, if nobody has any other questions, I'm happy to stick around for a few minutes, but thanks for coming, everybody. I hope you all have a good weekend.
Everybody watch out in your emails for those links. We'll be sending them soon. Veronica, to answer your question, there is no deadline. So if you finish this a month from now, please share it. And yeah, we love to see these kinds of things.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Awesome job, Gabi and Sean. Thank you.
Oh, thanks for having us.
I learned a lot. It was really fun.
So you do kind of like